The Muppet movie was released on June 22, 1979, after 3 seasons of The Muppet Show, 2 pilots, 10 seasons of Sesame Street, multiple specials, and hundreds of late-night spots and commercials. It tells the story of how the Muppets got together and became rich and famous. The only issue is that it skips everything I just mentioned, having Orson Welles hand it to them instead.
Miss Tracy, prepare the standard rich and famous contract for Kermit the Frog and Company.
Now, I understand why this decision was made. Getting to be cultural icons like the Muppets is a long and tedious process that doesn't always make the best 90-minute musical comedy.
Well, it's sort of approximately how it happened.
But with my goal this year of better understanding the Muppets and the relationship between their world and our own, I am curious as to how the Muppets actually got to have their own TV show. Let's look at our own world and see if there's any historical pieces we can use to help understand how the Muppets truly became rich and famous. Jim Henson was born on September 24, 1936 in Greenville, Mississippi. He grew up in the nearby town of Leland and University Park, Maryland, moving back and forth several times. Jim was always seen as a quiet but creative child, occasionally performing in skit nights at Cub Scouts, but mostly encouraged in his artistic work by his grandmother, Sarah Dear Brown.
She encouraged Jim in his play and in his dressing up and prop making, coaxed stories from him, and indulged his fondness for puns and practical jokes. She instilled in Jim a sense of genteel self-importance. It wasn't arrogance, but simply a conviction that he could do and be anything he wanted. A confidence and self-awareness that, for the rest of his life, family and colleagues admired and found reassuring.
While Jim's paternal side was more science-oriented, his maternal side was filled with stories and jokes, constantly trying to one-up each other with wilder and funnier stories around the dinner table. Another source of comedy in the Henson house came from radio, with shows like The Charlie McCarthy Show impressing Jim with the characters Edgar Bergen created.
Bergen engaged his characters in rapid-fire banter, so nimbly rotating flawlessly between his own voice and the voices of his impish sidekick Charlie McCarthy, or Dimble Mortimer Snurd, that radio listeners were convinced they were real people. Jim Henson, for one, was certain of it. "I wasn't thinking of any of those people as puppets," he said. "They were human to me."
His love of stories only grew when Jim learned of television. Kermit the Frog, or rather the Tadpole, was born in the swamps of Louisiana sometime around the Great Depression.
You're originally from a swamp, is that correct?
I am sort of from your neck of the woods, I think.
Yes.
Down there in the Louisiana swamps? Yes.
That's right.
The trouble with this part is that Muppets don't age the same way humans do, so while Kermit is said to be one of the oldest, his age is almost always the same. Anyway, in the swamp he grew up and made friends with swamp creatures and people alike. One of his closest friends was a human named Jim Henson. Together they would perform for friends and family, making faces, doing pratfalls, and some imitations. This relationship lasted a long time, even after the Hensons moved away. Ever since he first saw television, Jim knew he wanted to be a part of it as soon as he could. After a failed kids' morning show with WTOP his senior year, Jim got in contact with local NBC executives who brought him on as a variety show act with the puppets from the canceled show, and even had him make 2 more puppets for a show with Joe Campbell that never amounted to anything. Still, Jim was now doing what he wanted, working on TV. To further his knowledge, he enrolled in the University of Maryland, where he studied home economics and took classes such as costume design, set building, and puppetry.
The home economics department, or practical arts as it came to be called, was no haven for aspiring homemakers, as it was so often derisively described. Instead, it housed a wide variety of art and education programs, including several commercial art courses coveted by those wanting to be advertising executives.
It was in that puppetry class where he would meet his future co-puppeteer and wife, Jane Nebel. In early 1955, WRC began developing a new midday variety show called Afternoon. The higher-ups asked Jim to do some segments, and he brought Jane on as co-puppeteer. On March 7, 1955, the Washington Post and Times-Herald made history describing Jim and Jane's piece as special features by the Muppets, who are puppeteers. Jim and Jane's segments of lip-syncing comedy records was a standout for the show, and because of it, 2 months later, the Muppets were offered a choice 11:25 p.m. time slot for their own 5-minute show. One day in mid-1955, Kermit received a letter, which was hard due to the ruralness of the swamp, from his old friend Jim Henson. There's a television network up in Washington that's looking to create a new show. If you want to come and act, there's a part for you. Sam and Friends began on May 9, 1955, introducing the Maryland and D.C. area to Sam and his many friends, Harry the Hipster, Hank, Frank, Yorick, and Kermit. During the 5 minutes of runtime, the Muppets would lip-sync to comedy albums and generally come to a violent end, whether consumed, shot, or simply blown up. Its 11:25 time slot didn't last long, and Sam and Friends briefly went off air. but due to major backlash, the show returned in jump days and time slots for several years. During those years, the WRC got Jim and Jane to perform for other late night and variety shows, which grew to other stations and cities when The Tonight Show with Steve Allen, a nationally broadcasted NBC show, hosted a segment of The Muppets in 1956. The Muppets brand expanded even more when in 1957, the Wilikns Coffee Company contacted Jim with hopes that he would create commercials for the brand. From this partnership spawned Wilikns and Waltkins, an advertising campaign that used two puppets and Jim's deadly humor to sell Wilikns coffee.
You know, people who don't drink Wilikns coffee just blow up sometimes.
Oh, that's a lot of...
See what I mean?
I'm going to take a brief pause here and talk about one thing that I'm kind of struggling to figure out about the Muppet Universe. So, in our universe, the Muppets keep the names that they were originally given. Kermit's always been known as Kermit, Fozzie's always been Fozzie, Dr. Teeth, Mildred, Thog, etc. But with that understanding, is that true always in the Muppet Universe? Obviously, there are performers that can take on different names for the performances, but what I'm trying to ask is Wilikns and Waltkins their actual names in universe? Or are they character names? Because if they are their actual names, what a relief on Muppets Inc. to find someone named Waltkins for their Wilikns coffee commercial. Anyway, the Wilikns coffee commercials were such a success that other coffee brands asked for commercials, which raked in a lot of money. This increase in demand and notoriety, along with the 1958 Best Local Entertainment Program Emmy win, led Jim and Jane to expand their working crew, with Jim now recording some original tracks to sync to, and bringing in another performer, Bobby Payne. Despite all this success, one thing was true above all else with Jim Henson. He never wanted to be known as a puppeteer. He only got into puppeteering because it was the easiest way for him to work in television. Puppetry in the States was seen as children's gag and passing comedy, not like the art Jim wanted to be known for. While never wanting to be a puppeteer, his outlook on puppetry as an art changed after a 1958 trip to Europe.
That was the first time I'd ever met any other puppeteers. When I traveled around, I saw the work of a number of people. They were very serious about their work. I thought that what they were doing was really interesting. It was at that point I realized that puppetry was an art form, a valid way to do really interesting things. I came back from that trip all fired up to do wonderful puppetry.
After returning to the States, Jim was reinvigorated with artistic spirit and love for his business partner. He and Jane were married in 1959 after they both called off engagements to their fiancés. To reiterate, both Jim and Jane were engaged to other people. They both called off their marriages to marry each other. While Jim was now invigorated with puppet artistry, Kermit had a big concern in mind during this time. Besides Sam and Friends and possibly the Charlie McCarthy Show, puppets and Muppets alike were largely absent on television. It was very hard to break into the industry, and doubly so when you're typecast to children's entertainment. However, with the new success in commercials and increasing returns on talk show segments, Kermit knew there was a place on television for others like him. Muppets Inc., a talent agency in this universe, would be the frontrunner for Muppet representation. Along with the show, commercials, and late-night segments, Jim Henson immersed himself in the culture of puppetry by attending the annual Puppeteers of America convention. It was at the 1960 convention in Detroit where he met Mike and Frances Osnowicz and their son, Frank.
For the young Frank Osnovich, puppetry was only a hobby, and an almost incidental one at that, placing a distant third behind girls and sports.
Despite Frank still being in high school, Jim offered him a job at Muppets Inc., which Frank turned down temporarily. He instead suggested his co-worker, Jerry Jewell. Jewell quickly agreed and joined Jim, Jane, and Bobby in Maryland. Forewarning right now, there are a lot of J names in Muppets history. Jim and Jerry didn't stay in Maryland for long, when the U.S. Department of Agriculture asked them to perform at a U.S. food fair they were setting up in Hamburg, Germany. Jim agreed, but decided not to bring along the Sam and Friends characters. He saw the fair as a place to experiment with two things, an international market and new faces with new acts. The Muppets' involvement was so successful that they returned to Germany less than a year later in 1962 for the U.S. Information Agency's Green Week in Berlin. Before the return, however, the book had to close on the Muppets' first show. Sam and Friends came to its last explosive ending on December 15, 1961. Afterwards, Muppets Inc., soon to be renamed to Henson Associates, would journey to Atlanta to film a half-hour pitch called Tales of the Tinker D, introducing new faces such as King Gosh Posh and Tamanella Grinderfall, narrated by a newly frog-looking Kermit. The show was never picked up, and was pitched later in 1964 with a shorter time, lower budget, and new character of Rufus the dog, but it also wasn't picked up. Executives didn't believe the Muppets had enough star power to front a half-hour-long show, but they could co-host someone else's. Rowlf the dog was a piano player that I'm going to assume got scouted while Jim or Kermit was traveling around the States. Rowlf's inclusion in the Muppet movie is really out of place, and I like to think his in-universe addition to the company was just as confusing.
My name is Rowlf the dog, and I was playing the piano and oh, never mind.
However confusing his introduction was, he began working with Muppets Inc. on commercials for Purina Dog Chow, starring alongside Baskerville the Hound. After his commercial work, Rowlf would be the first Muppet to break beyond the confines of commercials and late-night segments when he became a recurring member of The Jimmy Dean Show. He talked and sang with Jimmy and was so popular with the audience that he got the most fan mail out of the cast.
Doesn't she know how to speak English? No, Lassy's a dog, and dogs only bark, Ralph. Dogs only bark? That's right. What am I, a kangaroo?
This was a major milestone in Muppet popularity and representation, but it would be a while until Rowlf and Kermit got their own show to show what they were really capable of. Because the Jimmy Dean Show pushed the Muppets further into stardom, it required a larger team. Jim convinced Frank Oz to join after graduation, brought in puppet builder Don Sullen, puppeteer Jerry Nelson, who would later be known as Robin, Count Von Count, and Floyd Pepper, and began making IBM meeting films for David Laser. This increase in hands also allowed Jim time to experiment with his filmmaking, making short films Timepiece and The Cube. The Jimmy Dean Show ended in March of 1966, but despite its end, the Muppets' trajectory was higher than ever before. Jim Henson met John Stone in 1965 while working on a Snow White pilot that would include a mix of humans and puppets. This pilot was never picked up, but was reworked into an hour-long retelling of Cinderella, which was filmed in 1968 and aired on CBC in 1969. At the same time, Stone was contacted by the Children's Television Workshop to create a successful television program that would make a difference in the lives of children, in particular, poor inner-city children, and help prepare them for school. Stone agreed and suggested bringing Jim into the project to lead the puppetry segments planned, which he agreed to do. The Children's Television Network was a non-profit organization that brought together children's entertainers and academics to create a fun and educational TV show. CTW worked throughout 1968 to better understand what this TV show would become and each person's part in it.
CTW was interested in putting together short films, no more than 1 or 2 minutes long, to teach children letters, numbers, or other concepts like body parts. These short pieces were to be inserted like advertisements, and in fact would always be referred to as inserts at regular intervals throughout each show. With his rat-a-tat editing style that had defined Timepiece and Youth 68, bold animation techniques, and his knack for quickly and effectively driving home a point, Jim was uniquely suited to take on the task of creating CTW's first educational commercials.
After all the pieces were figured out, it was time for CTW to make a pitch reel for the show, still unnamed. Rowlf and Kermit, being the two most recognizable faces with the project, would take up the roles of host for this reel.
My name is Rowlf, and this is my friend Kermit. Hiya. And in case you're feeling a little weird sitting there listening to a dog, let me explain that I'm not your run-of-the-mill dog. I'm a Muppet dog.
They explained the different segments that would be included for the show to teach kids, while a boardroom of higher-ups tried to figure out a name for the show.
Hey, these kids can't read or write, can they?
No.
Then how's about we call the show Hey Stupid?
At the end of the pitch, Rowlf sends the men away and Kermit suggests a simple name.
Why don't you call your show Sesame Street? My entire career as a TV educator nipped in the... What was that? Sesame Street. You know, like Open Sesame? It kind of gives the idea of a street where neat stuff happens. Kermit, why, you're a genius! Mwah!
Despite Rowlf's insistence on the show being made, he would only appear in 9 seconds of the entire show.
9 lights.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Instead, a major focus would be on bringing new talent for the show, such as Big Bird, Oscar, Bert and Ernie, and later Grover, Cookie Monster, and Elmo. The introduction of Big Bird and Oscar only occurred after the test screenings with the target audience.
We realized right away that we had a problem, because the people on the street just couldn't compete with the puppets. We had children watching these shows, and their attention span just went way down when we cut to the street. The solution to this unforeseen hitch, then, was simple. Muppets were needed on the street.
The first season didn't allow for many hiding places for the puppeteers on the street, leading to Oscar's signature trash can and Big Bird's full-body appearance. Additionally, due to the time commitment the show would entail, Jim hired puppeteer Carol Spinney to perform both characters on the street segments, while he and Frank would film Kermit, Bert, and Ernie in between late-night and commercial gigs. Sesame Street would debut on November 10, 1969, on national educational television, with rousing success. It wouldn't be long, however, until the Muppets, more specifically Kermit, got some controversy from appearing on Sesame Street. On April 10, 1970, ABC aired Hey Cinderella for American audiences. For this special, Kermit recorded additional material to be inserted before commercial breaks. Critic Jack Gould, who previously called the Muppets on Sesame Street distressingly bland, voices dislike of Kermit being a commercial icon.
Apparently, the Children's Television Workshop, producer of Sesame Street, is not adverse to cashing in when success strikes. Whatever television may be called, public or commercial, sooner or later the compromises start if the ratings are right. Sesame Street last night lost a little of its luster as Kermit broke the faith and became one more pitchman.
To this review, Jim responded,
"For the past 10 or 12 years, approximately half my income has been derived from producing Muppet commercials. These have most often been for adult products, as most of my work has historically been adult. However, since the advent of Sesame Street and my own interest and concern for children's television, I am an enthusiastic member of Action for Children's Television, I have become a great deal more selective, and have turned down many lucrative offers that seem to be trying to capitalize on Sesame Street."
Despite this defense for some commercials, Henson Associates did limit the amount of future commercial work, possibly egged on by the recent FCC ruling stopping children's characters from being used in advertising. More importantly, however, Kermit stepped down from Sesame Street for the second season, returning for the third season and continuing to do work on the Tales from Muppetland series, which now had an American precedent. The Muppets exploded with the growing popularity of Sesame Street and the albums and merchandise that spawned from it, including Kermit's iconic song, Being Green.
Why wonder? Why wonder? I'm green. It'll do fine. It's beautiful. And I think it's what I want to be.
CTW show had made the Muppets household names, but also drove Jim further into the children's puppeteer title he disliked. He pushed for more family-centric entertainment with his two other Tales from Muppetland specials, The Frog Prince and the Muppet Musicians of Bremen, and a Christmas special titled The Great Santa Claus Switch. Henson Associates also continued to grow, introducing performers Fran Brill and Richard Hunt, and puppet builders Bonnie Erickson, Franz Fazakis, and Dave Goles to its roster. To further push his idea that Muppets were puppetry for adults, Jim agreed to work with Nancy Sinatra on a show in Las Vegas, using new full-body Muppets performing many songs during the show. This performance also inspired Jim to pursue the possibility of doing a puppet-centered Broadway show.
Adult audiences, at least in the United States, had never had the chance to see what good puppetry was capable of. The Broadway show Jim envisioned would finally give adult audiences that tunity. More important, in the process, it would help him shed the stifling image the media was creating of Jim and the Muppets as purely sugar-coated kids' entertainment.
The Broadway show eventually fell through due to different priorities arising and the continued worry by executives that the Muppets weren't lasting enough. That argument was slowly waning, especially when Jim Henson was given the opportunity to pitch the Muppet series he'd been trying to get off the ground for over a decade. ABC decided to trust Henson Associates and greenlight a pilot with another one a year later. The two pilots showcased how a Muppet show would work in two different styles. The Muppets Ballantine show was both a pilot and a holiday special. It followed the writer and host of the show, Wally, trying to understand what love is. This leads to different cast members and special guest Mia Farrow singing and acting out their beliefs on love.
Gee, what I've missed, 'cause I never been kissed by a real live girl.
Culminating with a final song about how George the janitor loves his mop.
He's got love, 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 love.
I got love.
He's got love.
Sweet, sweet love.
Sweet, sweet love.
Sex and Violence, on the other hand, was a loose collection of songs, sketches, and a running gag about a deadly sin pageant hosted by Nigel, guitar player Floyd Pepper, and studio insert of moral decency Sam Eagle.
Do we want an 8th deadly sin for the pageant?
Which one?
Who's your 8th? Wearing funny pants to a funeral.
There were problems with both pilots. While Ballantines used an assortment of new and old Muppets, introducing Mildred, George, and Crazy Harry while keeping Kermit, Thog, and Rufus, it felt more like a holiday special than a TV show, which is my guess for why a second pilot was made. Sex and Violence, meanwhile, was primarily newcomers, with Nigel, Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem, and the beginning of Pigs as crowd fillers. This, on top of the lack of consistency with each segment and minimal plot, is probably what led ABC to not picking up the show. This near miss deflated a lot of the Muppets' hopes for a new show, especially Kermit.
I got one lousy line.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. It's nothing. It's a nothing show, you know.
Nothing.
Yeah.
A couple months after Sex and Violence aired, CBS reached out, interested in picking up the show, which new producer David Laser pushed Jim to pursue differently from the pilots.
He would make a commercial, not just a regular commercial, but a lengthy Muppet Show pitch reel, one that would highlight some of the Muppets' strongest performances, spotlight the versatility of the Muppets, and ideally, do so in a way that conveyed Jim's unique and slightly skewed brand of humor.
The pitch would end with this very blunt plea.
In conclusion, I would like to point out that it is time for a revolutionary new look in primetime variety television, and the combination of the Muppets and George Schlatter can bring this to the world. Yes, for over 20 years, Jim Henson here, and the dedicated group of people that make up the Muppets have been developing the art of television puppetry to heights that were never before considered possible. And, at the same time, George Schlatter here has been developing and creating new forms in television comedy that have changed the very face of primetime television. From the same creative minds that brought you Rowlf of The Jimmy Dean Show, Laugh-In, Sesame Street, The Cher Show, Turn On. What? Oh, anyhow. These two giants of the industry have fused their creative juices into one great explosion of brilliant television programming. And what is this fusion of creative juices called? The Muppet Show. A show that will be loved and adored by every Nielsen home in the country. Small children will love the cute, cuddly characters. Young people will love the fresh and innovative comedy. College kids and intellectual eggheads will love the underlying symbolism of everything. Freaky, long-haired, dirty, cynical hippies will love our freaky, long-haired, dirty, cynical Muppets, because that is what show business is all about. Yes, and when this show hits, the careers of the men who made the decision to put this show on the air will skyrocket. People like Bob Wood, Lee Curlin, Perry Lafferty, Oscar Katz, and even Tom Swofford will become stars in their own right. The names of these men will become household words like stove, sink, toilet. No, like patriotism, apple pie, and mother. Friends, the United States of America needs the Muppet Show, and you should buy this show. Now, we're not pulling any punches here. I mean, there's nothing subtle about this pitch. So buy the show and put it on the air, and we'll all be famous. The Muppets will be famous, and CBS will be famous because we'll have a hit show on our hands, and we'll all get temperamental and hard to work with, but you won't care because we'll all make a lot of money, and Schlatter and Henson will be happy, and you will be happy, and Kermit's mother will be happy. And God will look down on us and smile on us, and he will say, let them have a 40 share.
What the hell was that all about?
CBS did not buy their show. So for now, Jim looked elsewhere, back to NBC, where a young producer was trying to redefine late-night television. Lorne Michaels began working on what would become Saturday Night Live in 1974, and by late 1975 had gotten all the people he wanted on the show.
When we were starting Saturday night, I knew that I wanted as many different styles of comedy as I could possibly have, and I knew some of the ingredients would be. I just assumed that the Muppets under Jim would be able to do one segment a week.
Once again, the Muppets were brought on someone else's show, but this time they'd stopped the show more than being showstoppers. Jim insisted on having a new group of Muppets for the show, creating the Land of Gorch. The biggest issue with the Muppets on SNL was only writers contracted for the show could write for them, and all of the writers hated the Muppets.
I think our very explosive, more cartoony comedy didn't jive with their kind of Second City, casual, laid-back comedy, so the writers had a lot of trouble writing for us. Compounding the problem was that many SNL's writers were also performers on the show, and every minute of airtime devoted to the Muppets meant one less minute that could be spent on cast members, who were rapidly developing their own personalities and breakout characters.
This led to a somewhat strenuous relationship between the Muppet performers and the rest of the cast. This was quickly resolved when the Muppets exited after the first season, as another show just became available. British Lord Lew Grade immigrated to England in 1912 and began acting in vaudeville acts in 1926. Always a fan of theater and the arts, he became a theater manager and invested in a new invention known as television, creating his own studio, Associated Television, or ATV. Jim Henson had worked on ATV before, when Julie Andrews visited Sesame Street in 1973 and had her special My Favorite Things in 1975, where she wrote a song for Kermit. Also in 1975, CBS executive Thomas Miller wanted to show original Muppet programming on CBS-affiliated stations, and reached out to Abe Mandel, the president of Grade's other company, ITC Entertainment. Grade was interested in producing and told Mandel to talk to Jim about doing a show in England. This sounds roundabout, but it made sense at the time. You see, TV stations were getting a lot of flack at the time, only showing their company's productions and making it hard for other people to break into the industry. This caused television networks to block out a time when new shows unaffiliated with the stations would air. Basically, Thomas Miller wanted a Muppet show, but instead of taking on the financial burden and possible failure, he gave it to Lord Grade, thus making it independent and available for that time slot. Makes sense? Jim easily agreed and shipped the Muppet performers to England for the next 5 months for the show Jim Henson had been waiting for almost his entire life. The in-universe conclusion has some differences. Instead of England, the Muppets would find their green light in Hollywood. Wealthy real estate tycoon J.P. Gross, being a man of art and nepotism, bought a theater where his nephew Scooter suggested bringing the Muppets to perform a show and televise it through CBS. Gross got a hold of the pitch reel and liked the idea of money, so he offered Kermit and the Muppets a show. But if they were going to do a show, it was going to be the best of both pilots. New and familiar faces, a guest star for each episode, better structured plots, and returning scenarios and set pieces. Most importantly, they wouldn't rely on some new host of the show. Nigel was a good leader, but didn't have the star power to host, so he gladly took the position of conductor. The role of host and MC had to go to the oldest, the most recognizable, the frog who had pushed for this show for over 15 years.
It's the Muppet Show with tonight's guest star, Mr. Joel Gray.
Thanks for watching this biography/Muppets fanfic with historical sources. I want to give a special thanks to my readers, who you can find linked in the description. Let me know what you thought, and subscribe if you want to join me on my Muppets journey. This video took me a little longer than I wanted to, but the next video is a little simpler, so I should be back soon. See ya!